She's back. Hello, hello. It is Thursday. Today has been a lovely, lovely day so far. We had ABA therapy at home. It went really well. Noah's using his words. He's not screaming. But today we're going into Genesis 22. I know we're skipping. But has there ever been something in your life that you desperately wanted to control? Well, I need to tell you about Abraham. He's my favorite. So God called Abraham when he was already old and told him to leave his country, his family, and everything familiar and go to a land that God would show him. Super vague. Also, God made Abraham a promise. I will make you into a great nation. Abraham didn't have a son. And years passed. Abraham and Sarah waited. They tried to take matters into their own hands. Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham, and Ishmael was born. Hagar was one of the maidens, we'll call it, right? She desperately wanted to give Abraham a son because God promised him something. But Ishmael wasn't the son God had promised. So then when Abraham was about 100, Sarah was way too old to have a baby, and it just seemed impossible, like God's promise was never going to come true. But then Isaac was born, the promised son. The answer to years and years of waiting. This guy was 100. Seriously, that's insane. So this is what makes Genesis 22 so powerful, because God comes to Abraham and says, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt offering. Excuse me? I don't know about you, but if God told me right now to put my child on a log and burn him, I would be terrified. This is the child that God promised to Abraham, okay? The child that Abraham waited decades for. The child through whom God said his promise would continue. And now God is asking Abraham to surrender him, to sacrifice his son that he's been waiting forever for. I think sometimes we read this story and immediately focus on the fact that God stopped Abraham from sacrificing Isaac, as if we weren't expecting God to stop this sacrifice. I want you to really think about it. Really, really think about it. It could be your children. It could be your marriage. It could be your finances, your career. Maybe it's your future. Maybe it's something you've prayed for so long that when God finally gave it to you, you became terrified of losing it. That's a real thing. That's a lack of trust. Abraham loved Isaac. The Bible specifically says, your son, your only son, whom you love. Which is crazy because God also gave his only begotten son to die for our sins on the cross. But anyway, God wasn't asking Abraham to pretend Isaac didn't matter. He was asking Abraham, do you trust me more than you trust what I've given you? So Abraham gets up early. He takes Isaac, he takes the wood, and they begin walking toward the area where God said that he needed the sacrifice, to the mountain. So Isaac eventually asked the question every parent would dread. I mean, if I was Isaac, I would have asked that question long before I started walking. He said, where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Imagine you're like going with your dad to go take care of something. You're like, wait a minute, we didn't bring the thing. And Abraham responds, God himself will provide the lamb. Think about that. Abraham doesn't know how this story is about to unfold, but he keeps walking because he has this relentless trust in God. And he loves him so much, he would do anything for him. So he keeps walking and he keeps believing, right? That's faith. Faith isn't always knowing what God is doing. Sometimes faith is taking the next step when you don't. And by sometimes, I mean all the time. You don't need to know the outcome. You don't need to know the how. So anyway, they reach the mountain. Abraham builds the altar. He arranges the wood. He's getting everything ready. He's about to make a sacrifice for God. And he places Isaac on it. Abraham reaches out his hand and bam, God stops him. Don't lay a hand on that boy. And Abraham looks up, totally shook. I mean, I'm doing everything that you asked. Now you're telling me not to lay a hand on him. There's a ram caught in the thicket. God had the lamb for him. Abraham ends up calling that place Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. But here's what I don't want us to miss about this entire story. God provided the ram, but Abraham had to be willing to release Isaac first. God provided the ram. So God asked Abraham to do something that probably sounded insane, but Abraham trusted to his core that God would provide, and he sure did. Sometimes the hardest part about, letting go of things that we can't control is the trusting. Because if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. But we want God to provide before we surrender. And that is so backwards. We want God to prove that he'll provide before we surrender and give ourselves to him. We want the backup plan before we let go. We want to know the ending before we take the first step. But Genesis 2 shows us that sometimes God asks us to trust him without giving us the whole picture. And surrender doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean that you stop praying. Surrender doesn't mean that you stop working. Surrender doesn't mean that you give up. It means that you stop believing that everything depends on you. Some things you can only take so far without God. But all things are possible with God. So today I want you to ask yourself, what am I desperately trying to control? What is the Isaac in your life? What are you afraid that if you release it to God, he won't give it back? Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a career, maybe it's a big situation, a small situation, maybe it's an outcome, maybe it's your timeline. Am I even going the right way? It's taking forever. Whatever it is, put it on that altar like Abraham did. Not because you don't love it, not because you're not trying hard, not because you don't have it in you, but because you trust God more than you trust yourself. Maybe your prayer today is simply, God, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know how many times I have prayed that. God, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know how this ends, but I trust you enough to release control fully. Because sometimes the greatest evidence of faith isn't what we're willing to receive from God. It's what we're willing to place in his hands. It's the way we worship when we're struggling. It's the way we call out to him when we're happy and we're sad and we're excited and we're nervous. So I want you to grab a journal or something, maybe a note in your phone, and name one thing you're desperately trying to control. Write it down and then pray. God, this belongs to you. I surrender my need to control the outcome. Help me trust you with what I cannot see. And then take one step further to reflect that surrender. So basically, trust isn't saying, God, I know exactly what you're going to do. Can't wait for you to do it. Trust is saying, God, I have no idea what you're doing, but I know who you are, and I know that if anyone wants the best for me, it would be you. So I want you to keep that in mind today. And I know it's late, so maybe not keep it in mind today, but try keeping it in mind for the rest of the week. We are on day 6, and I gotta be honest, I genuinely was not feeling up to it, but I made a commitment, like I said. Discipline is one of those things. Sorry, you guys see my pen. Discipline is one of those things where the only time it's gonna feel good is after you've done the thing. But if I would have waited or let the fact that I feel sick keep me from recording today, I would have been so upset because I would have been out of sequence. I would have given up. I don't like giving up. I never give up. I'm relentless. I don't give up. So I do want to read chapter 22, just so you have all the words, okay? Sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. "Abraham," God called. "Yes," he replied, "here I am." "Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you." The next morning, Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey and took 2 of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering and set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day of their journey, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. "Stay here with donkey," Abraham told the servants. "The boy and I will travel a little farther. We'll worship there and we'll come right back." So Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders, while he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them walked on together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "We have the fire and the wood," the boy said, "but where is the sheep for the burnt offering?" "God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son," Abraham answered, and they both walked on together. When they arrived at the place where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. And Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. At that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Yes," Abraham replied, "here I am." "Don't lay a hand on the boy," the angel said. "Do not hurt him in any way, for now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me even your son, your only son." Then Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught by its horns in a thicket. So he took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering in place of his son. Abraham named the place Yahweh Yireh, which means the Lord will provide. To this day, people still use that name as a proverb. On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. Then the angel of the Lord called again to Abraham from heaven. "This is what the Lord says. Because you have obeyed me and have not withheld even your son, your only son, I swear by my own name that I will certainly bless you. I will multiply your descendants beyond number, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. The sand on the seashore. Your descendants will conquer the cities of their enemies, and through your descendants all the nations of the earth will be blessed, all because you have obeyed me." Then they returned to the servants and traveled back to Beersheba, where Abraham continued to live. Soon after this, Abraham heard that Milcah, his brother, Nahor's wife, had borne Nahor 8 sons. The oldest was named Uz, the next oldest was Buz, followed by Kemuel, the ancestors of the Arameans, Kesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jedeph, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. In addition to these 8 sons from Milcah, Nahor had 4 other children from his concubine Reumah. Their names were Teba, Gaham, Tahash, and Maacah. Safe to say we're not using those as baby names. So, everyone's going through something. I myself have things that I try to control to the best of my ability, but sometimes there are some things, like I'm in a season right now where I have a very big problem and no solution. But I know that God has a plan, and I trust him to give me the best, even if it doesn't look like it. I know it's waiting for me on the other side of my obedience. So with that said, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and I will talk to you tomorrow.